The discovery the crew of the Nova Striker had been traveling for months through uncharted space. Their mission was to explore the unknown, to search for new worlds, and to discover things that no one had ever seen before. But when they received the coordinates for a new planet, the data they received was unlike anything they had encountered. This wasn't just any planet. This was a Class 15 death world. A world so dangerous that it was known to make entire species vanish. It was a world that no one dared to enter. But the Nova Striker was different. It was commanded by Captain Lena Brooks, a veteran of countless missions, and she was not one to back down from a challenge. The crew prepared themselves for the worst. They checked their weapons, ensured the ship's shields were fully functional, and double-checked their life support systems. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the crew could feel the tension in the air. The ship's systems started to glitch, lights flickering and screens malfunctioning. It was as if the planet itself was trying to block them from entering. But Captain Brooks remained calm. "Stay focused," she ordered. "We've dealt with worse." As they descended, they saw the planet for the first time. From space, it looked like any other planet. The surface was a mix of harsh deserts, towering mountains, and vast wild oceans. It was a planet that screamed danger at every corner. But what struck the crew most was the lack of any kind of life signals. There were no signs of any intelligent life, no transmissions, no signals, nothing. The ship finally touched down on the rocky surface. The landing was rough, but the Nova Striker held strong. The crew unbuckled from their seats and began to gather their gear. They knew they would need every piece of equipment to survive this world. The air outside was thick, with a strange metallic smell, and the ground felt uneven beneath their boots. Captain Brooks led the team out, her boots crunching against the dry, cracked earth. The landscape was eerily silent, a strange stillness in the air that made the crew uneasy. The only sound was the low hum of their ship's engines powering down. "All right, people, stay sharp," Captain Brooks said, her voice steady but commanding. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." As the crew ventured out into the barren wasteland, their sensors started picking up strange readings. At first, it seemed like the planet was void of any life. But the readings didn't make sense. There were faint traces of energy too organized to be natural. "What is that?" asked Lieutenant Max Carter, one of the scientists aboard the ship. He was scanning the readings with a portable device. "It's human-made," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "I can't believe it, but these signals ... they match Earth technology." The crew stopped in their tracks. The captain turned to him, her brow furrowed. "What are you saying, Carter? It looks like humans were here on this planet," he said slowly, eyes wide. The rest of the crew exchanged looks of confusion. The planet was known to be a death world, a place too dangerous for any species to survive. So how could humans have been here? They were supposed to be the weakest of the galactic species, always underestimated by everyone else. How had they managed to thrive on a world like this? "That's impossible," Captain Brooks muttered. "Humans have never been on a Class 15 death world, not to our knowledge." The crew continued their search, following the strange signals deeper into the wilderness. As they moved, they began to notice signs of human presence. The ground was scarred with the remains of old structures, some partially buried in the earth. It looked like a town had once stood here, but it was now abandoned and overrun by the planet's harsh conditions. The team came across rusted metal, doors half buried in the sand, their surfaces scorched by intense heat. "This doesn't make any sense," Carter said, inspecting the wreckage. "These buildings, they shouldn't be here. This world is supposed to be a death trap." Then, as they ventured further, they stumbled upon something even more shocking. A small group of humans, armed and watching them closely. The humans were dressed in simple, worn clothing, and their faces were hardened by life on this brutal planet. They were not scared of the newcomers, but rather curious. They didn't seem surprised to see them, "Who are you?" Captain Brooks asked, stepping forward cautiously. One of the humans, a woman with short dark hair and piercing blue eyes, stepped forward. "We're the survivors," she said flatly, her voice calm but firm. "We've been here longer than you think." The crew was stunned. The woman's voice was steady, but there was something in her eyes of fire that the crew couldn't ignore. This was no ordinary human. These people had lived and survived on one of the deadliest planets in the galaxy, and yet they stood here in front of the crew without fear. Survivors of what? Brooks asked, her voice low with suspicion. The woman looked around at her companions and then back at the crew. "You'll see soon enough. But first, we need to get you to safety. This planet isn't what it seems." The words echoed in Captain Brooks' mind as she nodded and motioned for the crew to follow. Something was off. Humans had not only survived. Here they had adapted, thrived even. And that was a mystery that needed solving. But before they could go any further, she knew they had to answer one question. What was humanity doing on a world that no one else dared to enter? History of survival. The survivors led the crew through the twisted remains of the settlement, their every step calculated, as though they had been living here for decades. The Nova Striker crew followed, each one of them in awe of how these humans had managed to survive for so long on such a dangerous world. It didn't make sense. How could a species that others called weak thrive on a planet that had wiped out entire civilizations? They walked through a narrow path, the walls, on either side covered in dust and rust. Strange symbols and markings were etched into the surfaces. Some looked ancient, almost alien in nature. Others were clearly human. The woman in the front, who had introduced herself as Lena, kept glancing over her shoulder, making sure the crew wasn't too close to the entrances of the caves that lined the walls. She knew what this planet was capable of. She had lived it for years. "This way," Lena called out, gesturing to an old stone building. It was large, with a crumbling roof, and walls that seemed to have withstood decades of storms and heat. As they entered, the air grew thick with the scent of old metal and burnt wood. Inside, the survivors had set up what looked like a small makeshift command center. There were maps, blueprints, and old computer screens that flickered faintly in the dim light. Everything was covered in dust, but the equipment was still functional, showing a high level of human ingenuity. "We built all of this from what was left," Lena said quietly, her voice laced with both pride and sadness. "When we first arrived, we had nothing. Just the clothes on our backs and the will to survive. But we had something else too. Knowledge. Earth's technology is far more advanced than most think. We had what it took to adapt to this world. And adapt we did." The crew stared in disbelief. It wasn't just about surviving. They had thrived. They had turned this planet, a place of certain death for any other species, into something they could live in. It was like nothing they had ever seen. The Nova Striker's crew were used to exploring the stars, encountering strange civilizations, and seeing planets uninhabited for eons. But this was different. Humans had built an empire here. "What do you mean by knowledge?" Captain Brooks asked, her curiosity piqued. Lena's face grew hard as she turned to face her. "When humanity arrived, we didn't just have tools and weapons. We had something far more valuable, a will to never give up. And we had a history of facing impossible odds. We took the best of Earth's technology and built on it. But we didn't just stop at building shelters. We made ourselves part of the planet." The crew exchanged confused looks, and Lena saw it in their eyes. They didn't understand. This planet doesn't just kill, it changes everything. The atmosphere, the creatures. Everything here is designed to break you down, make you submit or die. And yet, humanity survived. We were different. We used the very threats this world threw at us to adapt, to evolve. Lieutenant Carter, always the curious one, stepped forward. "Evolve? What do you mean? You're saying humans evolved here?" "Lena," nodded slowly, a hint of something strange crossing her eyes. Yes, we didn't just adapt to the environment, we became part of it. The deadly creatures here, the toxic air, the storms, the extreme conditions, they became tools. Tools to sharpen our minds, our bodies. We evolved, yes, but we did it on our own terms. Not only did we survive, we mastered what others couldn't even begin to comprehend. Captain Brooks felt the weight of Lena's words. There was something unspoken in the way she said it, something that hinted at a deeper secret the survivors had kept hidden for so long. The captain's mind raced with questions. How had humanity done it? What had they done to survive where no one else could? We had to make some tough choices, Lena continued, her voice quiet as she led them deeper into the facility. We experimented, we enhanced our bodies, our minds. We adapted our DNA to handle the toxins, the radiation, the dangers. We even modified our senses to better understand the planet. We turned it into a resource rather than a curse. The world gave us nothing, and so we took what we needed to survive. The crew listened, still stunned. There were no words to explain the sheer magnitude of what Lena was saying. This wasn't just survival. This was humanity's triumph over a planet designed to destroy them. The survivors had transformed themselves into something new, something stronger. They were no longer just humans. They had become something more. But then, something in Lena's tone changed, and her eyes grew darker. We paid a price for it, she said quietly. The changes we made weren't without consequences. Not everyone could survive the transformation. Some lost their minds. Some couldn't handle the strain on their bodies. The price for evolution was steep. But those of us who survived became stronger. We became something else. The crew could feel the shift in the air. There was more to this story than Lena was letting on. What kind of modifications had these humans undergone? And why had they kept it all a secret? We didn't just survive. The death world, Lena added, her voice now laced with both pride and caution. We conquered it, and now you have to understand why we can't let anyone else know. The galaxy isn't ready for this. Captain Brooks looked at Lena, her heart racing with 1,000 questions. What were they hiding? And how had they kept it all hidden from the rest of the universe for so long? The crew was beginning to realize that this was no ordinary mission. They had stumbled upon something much bigger than they ever could have imagined. Humanity hadn't just survived, they had become the dominant force on this death world, and now the rest of the galaxy would have to reckon with it. The deeper the crew ventured into the survivors' compound, the more they realized just how much humanity had altered this death world to its advantage. Every corner of the settlement revealed another piece of their incredible survival strategy. They had built structures that defied the planet's hostile forces. The air outside might be toxic to anyone else, but here the survivors had plants that purified it, growing in gardens carefully protected by advanced shielding. Animals once vicious and unrelenting in their attacks were now part of the humans' world, either tamed or genetically modified to coexist peacefully. It was as if humanity had bent the very laws of nature to their will. Captain Brooks couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this world than met the eye. She had heard of humans being resilient, but this was something else entirely. As they walked through the settlement, she noticed the survivors watching them closely, their eyes full of knowledge and secrets they hadn't shared. Lena, the leader of the survivors, led them to a small building hidden away from the rest of the compound. It was covered with thick metal walls and seemed to hum with a strange energy. This is where we store our most important equipment, Lena explained, unlocking the heavy door. The inside was bathed in a soft blue glow, filled with computers, machinery, and maps of the planet. It looked like the heart of their operation, and the crew could feel its significance. But there was one thing that stood out above all else, a large, cylindrical device in the center of the room. It was humming quietly, its surface covered in strange symbols and glowing lines. "What is that?" Lieutenant Carter asked, stepping forward to get a closer look. "That is the source of our greatest secret," Lena said, her voice somber. "We call it the Nexus. It's a machine unlike anything you've ever seen. It's been buried on this planet for eons. We found it years ago, and it's the reason we're still alive." Captain Brooks narrowed her eyes. "A machine? But it looks alive?" Lena finished for her. "It's not just a machine. It's something else entirely. It's a part of this planet, a part of us now. And it's what keeps the Deathworld from breaking us." The crew stood in silence, the weight of her words settling on them like a heavy blanket. What did she mean by keeps the Deathworld from breaking us? Was this machine a shield or something more? "It's not just a shield," Lena continued, almost as if reading the captain's thoughts. "It connects us to the planet. It lets us control the very elements around us. The storms, the creatures, everything. We've learned to use the Nexus to bend the planet's hostile forces to our will. It's a tool, but it's also dangerous. It's what keeps us safe, but it's also what makes us a target." "A target?" Captain Brooks repeated. "Who would want to target you? You've been living here for years, undisturbed." Lena's face grew tight with concern. "There are other forces in the galaxy who know about the Nexus. They know what it can do. And they will stop at nothing to take it from us." A chill ran down the captain's spine. She had heard whispers of powerful factions, ruthless empires that would do anything to control technology like the Nexus. And now, she was starting to realize that humanity had built something that not only made them a force to be reckoned with, but also a target for the galaxy's most dangerous factions. "What do you mean by forces?" Carter asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you saying that there are enemies?" Lena's gaze darkened. "Enemies who have been watching us, waiting for the moment when we slip up. We've been lucky so far, but that luck won't last forever. The Nexus has given us the power to survive here, but it's also given us something else, an enemy we can't defeat." Captain Brooks felt a knot form in her stomach. The crew had come here expecting a simple mission: explore a dangerous planet, take some data, and move on. But now, it seemed like they had stumbled upon something far more dangerous. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were sitting on a powder keg. And it was only a matter of time before someone lit the fuse. "Why didn't you tell us about this sooner?" Brooks demanded. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. They had been kept in the dark, wandering blindly into a situation they didn't fully understand. "We were protecting you," Lena replied quietly. "We knew that if anyone knew about the Nexus, they would come for it. But you've seen it now. You're involved. And now you need to decide whether you'll stand with us, or leave before it's too late." The room fell silent. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had come here to learn about the planet, but now they were caught in something far bigger than they had ever imagined. They had unwittingly walked into the heart of a war. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" Captain Brooks finally asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. "Help us protect the Nexus," Lena said, her tone filled with both urgency and resolve. "We've survived the Deathworld because of it. But now, we need your help to keep it safe. The enemies are closing in, and if we don't act fast, this world will be lost. And with it, everything humanity has built here." As the weight of Lena's words sank in, Captain Brooks knew that they couldn't just walk away. They had become part of this battle now, whether they liked it or not. And soon, they would all have to make a choice: help protect the Nexus, or face the consequences of the galaxy's most dangerous factions finding it before them. The fight was about to begin, and humanity had already proven that they were ready to do whatever it took to survive. The hidden power the crew knew that they were standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than any of them had expected. Lena had opened their eyes to the truth about the Nexus, a machine that humanity had used to master the most hostile planet in the galaxy. But now they realized that the true power of the Nexus wasn't just about survival, it was about control. The control over a world that had broken countless civilizations and made even the bravest flee in terror. And the truth was that humanity had been holding that power, guarding it in secret, for years. Captain Brooks couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the Nexus than Lena was letting on. She had spoken of it as if it were just a tool, a means of surviving the planet's deadly forces. But Captain Brooks knew that there was something deeper to it, something that could change everything. If the Nexus is so powerful, she asked cautiously, why not use it to stop the enemies you spoke of? Why not fight back? Lena turned to face her, her expression darkening. It's not that simple. The Nexus is powerful, yes, but it's also fragile. Using it too much, too quickly, could destabilize everything we've built here. We don't just control the planet, we are connected to it. The Nexus is part of us now, part of our DNA, part of our very existence. If we push it too far, it could destroy us all. Captain Brooks felt the weight of her words settle deep in her chest. It wasn't just a machine, they had become one with it. The Nexus wasn't just about protecting them from the dangers of the death world. It was a lifeline, a delicate balance they had to maintain. And now, the crew had a choice. Stand by and let the survivors protect it on their own, or risk everything by helping them. The decision was made for them when the first attack came. It was sudden, a loud explosion that rocked the entire compound. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the walls of the building trembled as if the planet itself was retaliating. The survivors scrambled to their stations, alarms blaring throughout the settlement. Lena turned to Captain Brooks, her eyes wide with fear. They found us. The crew rushed to the control room, where they saw the first signs of their enemies, a fleet of alien ships descending from the sky. The ships were massive, their dark hulls glowing with an eerie light. They were advanced, far more powerful than anything the Nova Striker had ever faced. The aliens had come to claim the Nexus, to take what humanity had fought so hard to protect. Captain Brooks knew that time was running out. They couldn't wait for reinforcements. They had to act. Now the survivors had shown them the Nexus, had revealed its power, but now they had to use it to defend themselves. Lena, Captain Brooks called out, her voice steady. What do we do? How can we activate the Nexus to fight back? Lena hesitated, her fingers twitching as she glanced at the large cylindrical device in the center of the room. We can activate it, she said slowly, but it's not without consequences. The Nexus can create a shield around the entire settlement, one strong enough to stop their ships. But we'll have to push it to the limit. And once we do, we may not be able to control it anymore. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. It was a dangerous move, one that could either save them or destroy them. But there was no time to second-guess. The alien fleet was closing in, and if they didn't act fast, the survivors' world would be gone forever. Do it, Captain Brooks said firmly. Activate the Nexus. We'll deal with the consequences later. Lena nodded, her face grim. She moved to the control panel beside the Nexus, her hands flying over the buttons and switches. The air around them began to crackle with energy, and the entire compound seemed to hum with a strange vibration. The Nexus was coming to life, its lights flashing brighter and faster, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Here it goes, Lena said, her voice tense. Brace yourselves. A massive wave of energy erupted from the Nexus, spreading out in all directions. The ground shook, and the sky above them rippled with light as a barrier formed around the settlement, blocking the incoming alien fleet. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the alien ships began to fire, their weapons crashing against the invisible shield. But it held. The shield was holding strong, deflecting the blasts with ease. The crew and survivors watched in awe as the alien ships tried to break through, but the Nexus was too powerful. The shield pushed back the attackers, keeping them at bay. It was the first victory in what would undoubtedly be a long and dangerous fight. But then, the unthinkable happened. As the shield held firm, the Nexus began to pulse with energy, its power growing uncontrollably. The ground beneath them trembled violently, and the sky above them began to darken, swirling with energy. It was as if the planet itself was reacting to the Nexus being pushed to its limits. The shield was holding, but at what cost? "We've got to stop it," Carter shouted. "The Nexus is going out of control." Lena's face was pale as she frantically tried to deactivate the Nexus. "It's too late," she said, her voice strained. "We've pushed it too far. There's no turning back now." Captain Brooks could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the decision they had made. They had activated the Nexus to protect themselves, but now they were in the midst of a storm they couldn't control. The battle was far from over, and the true cost of using the Nexus had only just begun to show itself. What had they unleashed, and would they be able to contain it before it was too late? The future of the survivors, and perhaps the entire planet, now rested in their hands. The ultimate weapon, the air around the settlement, had turned heavy, charged with an energy the crew couldn't comprehend. The shield, powered by the Nexus, was holding firm against the alien assault, but it was becoming increasingly unstable. The ground trembled with every pulse of energy, and the sky above was a swirling vortex of light and power. The Nexus was pushing beyond its limits, its core glowing with an intensity that threatened to tear everything apart. Captain Brooks could feel the heat radiating off the machine, and for the first time since they had arrived on the Deathworld, she felt a deep sense of dread. They had made a choice, and now they were paying the price. Lena's face was etched with panic as she worked feverishly to try and stabilize the Nexus. Sweat was dripping from her brow, her hands shaking as she manipulated the controls. "It's too much," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We've gone too far. The Nexus can't handle this level of energy. If we don't stop it soon, everything will collapse." The alien ships outside continued their relentless assault, firing weapon after weapon against the shield. But the shield didn't give way. It was holding, stronger than anyone could have imagined. The invaders were being pushed back, their ships unable to break through the barrier. However, the price for this defense was becoming clear. The very core of the Nexus was beginning to unravel. The energy it was generating wasn't just protecting them. It was slowly consuming the planet itself. "We need to stop this now," Lieutenant Carter shouted, his voice rising with urgency. "If this keeps up, we'll destroy the entire settlement, maybe the whole planet." Captain Brooks looked at Lena, her eyes filled with determination. "We need to find a way to shut it down, and fast. Can we use the Nexus to fight back, to end this once and for all?" Lena paused, her gaze shifting to the Nexus. She hesitated for a moment, and then a thought seemed to dawn on her. "There's a way," she said quietly, almost to herself. "But it's dangerous." The Nexus was never designed for offensive use, only for protection. If we try to reverse its energy flow, if we try to harness it as a weapon, there's no telling what will happen. "Tell me what we need to do," Captain Brooks insisted, her voice unwavering. "We don't have time for hesitation." Lena took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. The Nexus is connected to the planet on a molecular level. It's not just a shield, not just a tool, it's an extension of the planet itself. If we can reverse the flow of energy, we can turn it into a weapon. But we would need to focus the power, to channel it directly at the enemy fleet. It will be an all-out blast, a force so strong that it could destroy the alien ships in one strike. But doing so means risking everything. If we miscalculate, if the flow is off by even a fraction, the Nexus could explode. It could destroy everything we've worked to build. Captain Brooks glanced at the crew, her heart racing as she weighed the consequences. The aliens outside were relentless, their attacks unyielding. They had already seen what the Nexus could do, how it had turned the tide of battle. But now it was a gamble. A gamble with everything on the line. If they used it as a weapon, they could end the battle, destroy the alien fleet once and for all, but they could also doom the planet, and everyone on it. We don't have a choice. Captain Brooks said, her voice cold with resolve. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything. Do it. Use the Nexus. We'll take the risk. Lena looked at her for a long moment, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but she nodded. You're right. We don't have a choice. The air grew tense as Lena worked quickly, rerouting the energy from the Nexus and channeling it toward the alien ships. The hum of the machine grew louder, its power intensifying. The ground beneath them trembled violently, and the sky outside the compound crackled with energy. The alien ships, seeing the shift in the energy readings, started to pull back, realizing that they were facing something far more dangerous than they had anticipated, but it was too late. Lena hit the final control, and the Nexus erupted in a blinding explosion of light. The force of the blast was beyond anything the crew could have imagined. It was as if the planet itself had fired a massive beam of energy, a force so powerful that it tore through the alien fleet like paper. The ships didn't stand a chance. They were obliterated in an instant, their hulls ripped apart by the sheer power of the Nexus. The energy surge was so intense that it sent shockwaves through the entire planet, rattling the settlement and knocking everyone to the ground. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The crew lay on the ground, breathless, hearts racing from the sheer power of the blast. They had done it. The alien fleet was gone, wiped out in an instant by the very power they had feared would destroy them. The threat was over, but the victory was bittersweet. As the energy from the Nexus began to dissipate, the crew could feel the consequences of their actions. The planet's surface was beginning to crack, the ground shifting beneath them. The Nexus had been pushed beyond its limits, and now it was starting to fail. The shield that had protected them was beginning to fade, and the once stable environment of the settlement was falling apart. We did it, Carter said quietly, his voice filled with awe. But at what cost? Captain Brooks stood up slowly, her gaze fixed on the Nexus as it began to falter. We've won the battle, she said, her voice full of resolve. But we haven't won the war. The planet is dying. We need to figure out how to survive now, how to rebuild before it's too late. Lena stood beside her, her face pale and drawn. We've been living on borrowed time, she said softly. The Nexus was never meant to be used this way. We've reached the limit of what it can do. The future was uncertain. They had won, but the planet was dying, and the consequences of their choices were beginning to unfold. The crew and the survivors were standing at the edge of an unknown future, one where the choices they made would determine not just their survival, but the fate of everything they had fought to protect. The aftermath, the dust from the Nexus explosion, had barely settled when the true scale of the damage began to sink in. The ground beneath their feet was unstable, and the once steady hum of the settlement was now replaced with the faint creaking of structures that were beginning to collapse. The battle was over, but the fight for survival was just beginning. The alien fleet was gone, obliterated in the blink of an eye, but the consequences of using the Nexus as a weapon had left humanity's foothold on this death world in ruins. Captain Brooks stood at the center of the chaos, her mind racing with the gravity of the situation. Lena had been right. The power of the Nexus was beyond anything the crew had imagined. It had been their salvation and their destruction all at once. The ground shook once more, and the distant rumble of a collapsing building echoed through the settlement. There was no time to waste. If they didn't act fast, the entire planet could come crashing down around them. The settlements falling apart, Lieutenant Carter said, his voice tense. We need to get out of here before we're trapped. But even as he spoke, Lena shook her head, her eyes fixed on the wreckage of the Nexus. We can't leave. Not yet. The Nexus is the key to everything here. Without it, the planet will Die, and so will we. Captain Brooks turned to Lena, her expression hardening. What do you mean? The Nexus is failing. It's already caused enough damage. How can we keep it from collapsing? Lena's face was drawn, the weight of what they had done hanging heavy on her shoulders. The Nexus has been sustaining the planet for years. It's not just a weapon. It's a lifeline. It connects everything on this world, the atmosphere, the creatures, the land itself. Without it, this Deathworld will return to its natural state. And that means no one, not even us, will survive. The crew looked at each other, the enormity of the situation dawning on them. They had been so focused on fighting back the alien fleet that they hadn't realized what they were risking. The Nexus wasn't just an energy source, it was the planet's heartbeat. Destroying it had meant unleashing a chain reaction that would unravel everything they had built here. We need to stabilize the Nexus, Captain Brooks said, her voice calm but resolute. If we don't, we'll be dead within days. There has to be a way to repair it. Lena's eyes narrowed as she scanned the damaged Nexus. There might be a way, she said slowly. But it will take time. The power we released has destabilized the core. If we don't reset it, it will continue to unravel. We'll have to use everything we have to fix it, and it will be risky. If we fail, the planet will collapse, and we'll be trapped here. The urgency in her voice was clear, and Captain Brooks felt a chill of fear wash over her. They had gambled everything on the Nexus, and now it was their only hope. They had no choice but to try. They couldn't let this planet die, not after everything they had seen, everything they had learned about humanity's resilience. We'll do whatever it takes, Captain Brooks said firmly. Tell us what we need to do. Lena led them to a control room beneath the settlement, the air thick with tension. The screens flickered as they powered on, displaying the Nexus's intricate systems. The crew gathered around, their eyes trained on the screens as Lena began to explain the process of resetting the Nexus. It was complicated, far more complicated than anything they had ever dealt with. But Lena's experience, combined with the crew's skills, was their best chance. We'll need to manually reset the core, Lena said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. The Nexus is connected to everything here, but the core needs to be realigned. If we can channel the energy back into the system in the right way, we can stabilize it. But we'll have to work quickly. The damage is already done. Captain Brooks nodded, signaling the crew to get to work. They set to work with urgency, checking and rechecking every system, every line of code, every piece of machinery. The Nexus was a complex and delicate mechanism, and they couldn't afford to make a single mistake. Time was running out. As the crew worked together, Lena looked at Captain Brooks, her eyes filled with both determination and fear. This is humanity's last chance, she said quietly. If we fail, this world will fall. And so will everything we've built here. Captain Brooks placed a hand on Lena's shoulder, offering a moment of comfort. We won't fail. Not after everything we've seen. Not after everything humanity has been through. For hours they labored over the controls, working through the night to reset the Nexus and stabilize the core. Every moment felt like an eternity as the planet continued to tremble beneath their feet, as if the very ground was fighting against them. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Lena stood up, her face pale but hopeful. It's done, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Nexus is stable. The crew breathed a collective sigh of relief, their bodies exhausted, but their spirits lifted. The planet was no longer on the brink of destruction. They had saved it. They had saved themselves, but the victory was bittersweet. The Nexus had been their salvation, but it had also been their greatest threat. They had learned that humanity's survival was not just about strength or resilience. It was about knowing when to push forward and when to pull back. They had faced death, and in doing so, they had become something greater. They had become the protectors of a world that had once been their greatest enemy. The aftermath was not just a story of survival. It was a story of what humanity could accomplish when it pushed the limits of what was possible. But the future was still uncertain. They had won this battle, but there were other challenges waiting for them. As Captain Brooks looked out over the horizon, she knew that humanity's journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. Humanity's legacy. The settlement was still, the calm after the storm settling over the ruined landscape. The Nexus had been stabilized, and the world had avoided destruction. But even though the immediate danger had passed, there was a lingering feeling in the air, a quiet realization that this was just the beginning. The crew stood at the edge of what had once been a thriving compound, now reduced to debris and shattered buildings, but something about it felt different. They had been part of something far greater than they could ever have imagined. They had discovered humanity's incredible strength, its ability to survive against all odds, and the untold secrets this planet had been hiding for centuries. Captain Brooks stood silently, watching as the last remnants of the alien fleet burned up in the atmosphere, their wreckage falling to the planet below. The survivors were gathering the pieces of their shattered world, but they were no longer afraid. They had faced unimaginable threats, and they had come out on top. Humanity had proven its place in the galaxy, and now, no one would underestimate them again. Captain, Lena's voice broke through the silence. The tone was no longer filled with fear or urgency, but with something else, something like hope. You were right. We couldn't have done this without you. Without your crew. We owe you everything. Captain Brooks turned to face her, her expression calm but resolute. You don't owe us anything, Lena. You've shown us something we never thought possible. Humanity is stronger than we realized, but this is only the beginning. You've built something here, something that the galaxy has never seen before. And now, you're not alone. Lena nodded, her eyes reflecting the weight of what they had achieved. We've been keeping this world secret for so long, hiding it from the galaxy. But now it's time for humanity's legacy to be known. We've proven we can survive, but we've also proven that we can thrive. This world, this Nexus, it's just the start of what humanity can do. The crew exchanged glances, each of them feeling the significance of Lena's words. They had come to this death world, expecting to discover a species struggling to survive. But what they had found was something far more remarkable. Humanity had turned a world of destruction into a world of opportunity. They had adapted, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, evolving in ways no other species had ever imagined. And now they were ready to share that knowledge with the galaxy. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the settlement, Captain Brooks turned to her crew. We've completed our mission here, but the story isn't over. There's a galaxy out there that doesn't know what humanity is capable of. It's time to show them. Lena stepped forward, her gaze steady. We've kept this secret for long enough. But now we can't hide anymore. The galaxy needs to understand that humanity isn't just a weak species. We're survivors. And we're not just surviving, we're ready to lead. Captain Brooks nodded. Then let's make sure the galaxy knows. We've seen the potential of humanity, and now it's time for the rest of the universe to see it too. The crew boarded the Nova Striker one final time, their mission complete. As the ship ascended into the sky, leaving the Deathworld behind, they could see the planet in the distance, a world that had once seemed so alien and inhospitable, now a testament to humanity's indomitable will. The Nexus, still pulsing with energy, was a symbol of what they had achieved, the ability to turn the impossible into the possible, to turn death into life. The journey wasn't over. The galaxy was vast, filled with unknown dangers and challenges. But humanity had proven itself. The legacy of Earth and its people would now echo throughout the stars, a beacon of resilience and strength that no one could ignore. And as they looked toward the future, Captain Brooks and her crew knew one thing for certain: they were no longer just explorers. They were pioneers standing at the threshold of a new era for humanity. The galaxy would soon learn what it meant to face the full force of the human spirit. And they would never forget it. The end.